Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. I want to especially welcome all of you who are tuning in as part of the Daystar Network, our new friends. And if you like this content, please share it because we appreciate your support and we want to reach more and more people with really a message that says to people that there's another way of looking at the world than what you get in the mass media. That's why we're here. Well, we've got another great guest for you today. It's a lady named Priscilla West, and she's part of something called the Government Accountability Institute in the United States. We're going to learn more about that, but also part of her speciality or something she's been focusing her time on is something called SEL. This is social emotional learning. It's all the woke stuff that our kids and schools and universities are learning, and it's bled its way into the public sphere and is sadly dominating a lot of public discussion. And of course, in Canada, we had a recent school shooting here, and much like many of the incidents in the United States, tragically, it was a mentally ill trans person who is the culprit. And of course, these things are all connected. In any case, I want to welcome you to the program, Priscilla. It's great to have you here. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Great. So this is your first time on our show, but what we do is we start off with some framing aphorisms to kind of get us going. The first one is from someone called Molon Labe Patriot, and I don't think that's a real name. I don't think that's a Christian name, but it's pretty clever. They said, diversity isn't your strength. It lowers your wages, marginalizes your culture, increases your crime, fills your hospitals, occupies your housing, ruins your schools, consumes your taxes, tightens your laws, restricts your freedoms, endangers your children, and calls you racist. Next, from somebody who people who follow the show know that I admire greatly, is Dr. Thomas Sowell, perhaps the world's greatest living public intellectual, who wrote, the next time some academics tell you how important diversity is, ask them how many Republicans there are in their sociology department. He has a way with words, that man. And from his Canadian counterpart, Dr. Jordan Peterson, who said in response to people who wanted to compel his speech and use forced pronouns, he says, I don't recognize another person's right to decide what words I'm going to use. I think that's an important message. And then this one, why invade a country when you can just buy its institutions, turn its women against its men, make transvestites of its children, sell the wealth generated by its labor to foreign investors, and then introduce a foreign army as refugees and diversity to finish it off?
Wow.
Well, who do we have on our show today? Well, Priscilla West. She's an education researcher with the Government Accountability Institute. We're going to learn about that. And she's also author of The New Face of Woke Education, a book that she's written. She's a native of South Louisiana. She earned her degree in chemical engineering from LSU, and she began her career in oil refineries and international trading from Louisiana and Oklahoma to Venezuela and Barbados before launching her own oil brokerage facilitating petroleum cargo trades throughout the Atlantic Basin. 12 years ago, she and her family settled in Tallahassee, Florida, which is a beautiful part of the country. I've been there. It's lovely, where she took on her most challenging and rewarding role yet, full-time mom to her twins, who are teenagers. When she's not serving as an enthusiastic volleyball or soccer mom, she channels her analytic background into researching education trends and advancing grassroots advocacy for parental rights as her chapter chair with Moms for Liberty. So, Priscilla, you are a very busy person. And with all that you're doing, I wonder, what was it that made you decide to write this book?
Well, originally I served on a volunteer board for a classical charter school. That's kind of what got me into the education world. My mom's a teacher, my brother's a teacher, my grandparents were teachers, but I kind of took a different route and went into engineering. So it's kind of funny that this has become really my obsession. But when you've got kids in the school system and you begin to see what is really going on, it was quite confounding for a while. I couldn't figure out why it was going on, and I just had to get to the bottom of it. So
Hmm.
luckily, Peter Schweitzer's Government Accountability Institute is in my town, and I was able to join forces with them and take advantage of a lot of wonderful research tools and um, excellent editorial insight from those guys who wanted to have some projects going on in the education space. So
Mhm.
it's been a really, really fantastic opportunity for me.
You have basically a science background, and then, of course, you got into the big oil
That's
business.
right.
And, so that must have been, a very interesting place for you to be as a woman in that environment, obviously
It
sort of a
was.
male-dominated space.
Very male
Um,
dominated.
yeah,
I was in the refinery. I worked in the oil refinery for 5 years before going into the commodities world, which is also male dominated, but I loved it. You know, you talk about diversity, diversity of thought, but I really enjoy working with guys, you know? It's kind of they're
yeah.
very, straightforward.
And, yeah, I have a question for you because, the feminist position, and I'm oversimplifying here, but let's call it, second generation feminists, the people who say that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. They they seem to think, or they tell young, uh, women like yourself who excel academically and get into hard science or other types of study, whether it's law, medicine, or whatever, that their best path forward seems to be to behave like a man, to take on masculine traits. And that seems to be, based on the data, leading a lot of women astray. And, the incidence among small L liberal women, career women, of everything from alcoholism to drug abuse to depression, suicide is higher than ever. And I'm curious about, as you were going through university, did you feel that pressure to sort of uh, go down that feminist way? Because I get the impression that's obviously not the path that you chose for your life.
You know, I really didn't feel that. My graduating class at LSU in '94 was over half women. And all of
Mm.
the girls were getting all of the jobs. It was really bad for our guy, our classmates, graduating at that time because the poor guys, they were very, very smart fellows, and they were not getting the jobs. So I saw early on, like, hey, this it didn't really seem fair. I never felt pressured to adopt any masculine traits. I did. There was a little struggle when I worked at the refinery for 5 years. They were the only other women in the refinery were kind of, they were blue collar all the way. They wore their Nomex and carried their pipe wrenches, and they were a little, less feminine, I guess you could say. But I never felt any kind of pressure to do that. As a matter of fact, when I later moved to Venezuela, and I saw the women up in the high roles in that company up in PDVSA at the time.
Mhm.
I was astounded. They were gorgeous and smart and sexy. They were amazing. Those women
Yeah,
became my role models for sure because
yeah,
seemed a little bit like
yeah,
the ladies back at the refinery in the U.S. were kind of suppressing some of those feminine
yeah.
traits.
And it's a great message to talented young women who are coming up. That you don't have to behave like a man. You can be, your femininity is your power, and you can do all of that. And it seems like that's what you were able to do in these other women. And I just think that's a much more empowering message for young
Yeah,
women.
as long
Don't
as
you
you know
agree?
your stuff, you can be sexy if you want to, or you can not, it's up to you. And
Yeah,
it's,
yeah,
again, diversity of thought, not diversity of, chromosomes or skin color or anything else,
yeah,
just your ideas and your background, your viewpoints,
yeah.
what you really
Well,
have to contribute.
since you were at LSU in that era, I must ask you, did you ever get to meet the great Shaquille O'Neal, who left there in
I didn't get to
1992 to
meet
become a
him, but he had a class in one of the when I went to English class, there he was in a class there, and I used to see him, ducking under he would have to really duck down under the
yeah,
doorways because there was an old building, and it was
yeah.
kinda cool. He always had his tutor by his side, and I saw him, so it's kinda neat, little brush with stardom there.
Well, he went on to bigger and brighter things, and as did you. So let's talk about the Government Accountability Institute a little bit. How did you become? You mentioned that you got involved with Mr. Schweitzer, who's a very interesting guy, obviously very well known, very controversial. But how did you become involved with the Government Accountability Institute? And moreover, what is it precisely that they do?
Well, they do deep dive investigative research. As you know, Peter's got a new book out. It's been out for 3 weeks. It's up top of the New York Times bestseller list
Yes,
for three
I've
weeks
seen
in
it.
a
Yeah.
row. So he's really doing well. That's The Invisible Coup.
Hmm.
And he's got a top-notch research team assembled there, and they are just known for following the money. It's very
Yeah.
simple. There's his books, you say they're controversial, but everything in them is ironclad. They're it
That's
has
why
to
they're
be
controversial because
right.
they
They're
contain a
bulletproof,
lot
and
of
they have to
truth.
be. You
Yeah.
can't be,
Yeah.
in this space writing these things about about political figures and not be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The Government Accountability Institute, it seems self-explanatory. But is its focus journalistic, or is it more of a lobby group, or am I oversimplifying?
No, it's a media organization, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it exists really to research, to create Peter's books. So I just got really lucky that Peter has a profound interest in the education space and said,
Hmm.
"Hey, let's, let's take this on."
So was it really the education of your own children and an epiphany that you had about what's wrong with the educational system that kind of got you focused on the topic that led to your book? By the way, folks, we're talking with Priscilla West. Her new book is called The New Face of Woke Education. So Priscilla, was it your own kids and what was happening with them that kind of led you to feel that you wanted to treat this topic as the subject of your first book?
It was, when COVID happened and I pulled my kids out of school and I officially um, unenrolled them and did homeschooling for just a little while. And when I was doing that, I came across materials from Hillsdale College, actually, and I started reading about classical education. And I had never really heard of classical education, didn't know what it was. But as I started reading it, I said, "Aha!
Hmm.
This is what I've been missing, or this is what my kids have been
Right.
missing." And although I went to Louisiana public schools, my high school was excellent, and we had what did we have? 5 national merit finalists in my senior
Really?
class. We were
Wow.
it was I was really lucky to just come through at a very good time. I had excellent teachers, and when I look back at it, I had a classical education in my public
Mhm.
school. We had Latin class, we had so many of the things we did were just absolutely they would have been Hillsdale approved had Hillsdale known.
Right. Right.
And I saw so many things that were missing in my own children's education and the things that I wish they were getting at school. So I actually joined the board as a a volunteer board member of a classical charter school that was Hillsdale affiliated, and I learned so much. We got to go up to Hillsdale and train, and just it was a really wonderful experience. So that's really where it all started for me.
Mhm. Now, my understanding about Hillsdale, obviously, they do amazing work. I think, the person who maybe, uh, uh, expanded their reputation the most was the late Charlie Kirk, who was basically self-educated through Hillsdale courses. But, um is it a faith-based, this classical education you talk about, is it a Christian faith-based, or is it a secular foundation
No,
in
it's
terms
it's
of
not
classical liberalism?
explicitly, Christian based, no. I mean,
Mhm.
I would say it's more based on Western, maybe kind of Judeo-Christian,
Right. Mhm.
foundations, but it's more just Western civilization
Right.
type,
Yeah.
yeah,
So classical liberalism,
correct,
tied to
yes.
things like the importance of the individual, respect for freedom and liberty, and I guess concepts that we would associate with conservatism, like that we have this whole incredible heritage of knowledge, and that really students are standing on the shoulders of giants, and
Right,
that
the
we should
liberal
really
arts, the
celebrate those
true
people.
liberal arts, which
Right.
the meaning
Yeah.
of that phrase is the
Yeah.
freeing arts. So the things
Yeah.
that you need to know to be able to be a free human being functioning responsibly in society, right?
Yeah.
Contributing to your society.
This is the very antithesis of something that you talk about in your book called social emotional learning. And folks, we're talking with Priscilla West. She's the author of this new book, The New Face of Woke Education. And the thesis is sold to parents and teachers as harmless programming for emotional intelligence, whatever that is. Social emotional learning, or SEL, became, with the use of cloud based technology, a centralized
Hmm.
apparatus for values transmission that threatens the autonomy of future generations. So tell us about this, Priscilla, this SEL, what it is, and why it's so dangerous and damaging for our kids and their education.
Right. Well, it really gained momentum in the mid '90s. Um, do you remember a book called Emotional Intelligence?
I certainly do.
It
Yeah,
was on the end caps of every bookstore. I
yeah,
remember it as well, and I kind of wonder if I might have even had the book at some point. It was
yeah,
very
yeah.
popular. It was a New York Times bestseller, but it was written by um, the New York Times science writer Dan Goleman. Dan
Hmm.
Goleman, back in the '70s, won a traveling fellowship. He was a Harvard PhD or psychology student, and he won a traveling fellowship to go to the Far East and study ancient systems of psychology and meditation.
Hmm.
So he did that. And when he came back, he began writing books. He wrote a long string of books. That emotional intelligence book was when he really hit it big. But his work
Yeah.
was sponsored by something called the Fetzer Institute. Have you heard of the Fetzer Institute?
Not until your book.
Right. It's a new age organization whose mission statement says something like creating the foundations for a loving world. It's kind of vague, but it didn't
Yeah.
really directly apply to public education. So they started this new organization called CASTLE, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social,
Oh,
and
they love
Emotional
their acronyms,
Learning.
don't they?
Right. The acronyms are so dense. It
Yeah.
took me a really long time to get a functional knowledge of all of the acronyms, long enough to be able to read through a whole sentence
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
understand what these people were doing. Right. So
Hmm.
this Castle organization started in the mid '90s. They began pushing what they called social and emotional learning. They didn't really define social and emotional learning, an actual published definition. I couldn't find one until 1997. So they were actually doing it before they had published the definition. But
Hmm.
within 5 years, they had published a review of something like 80 of these social emotional learning curricula. They're all over the country. But this whole movement is just a large group of it was a lot of psychologists. I started to notice they were all PhD psychologists. And I'm like, why? If it was really just about how to teach kids better, that we would be seeing results of that by now. But
Hmm.
that really wasn't the focus. The focus was the same as the Fetzer Institute's mission, and that's why they funded it, was to make
Hmm.
everyone more loving, and it really has a strong collectivist bent.
Hmm.
And it has trickled its way through education. These guys have been, very influential. You had Eileen Rockefeller on the board. You had Warren Buffett money. You had a lot of very influential people, to the point that today, if you look at almost any school or district or state's education standards and their frameworks, you've always got this mention of collective goals.
Hmm.
Students will focus on the collective good. You see it
Right.
again and again, and it's like, wait, collectivism?
Hmm.
What? How did that get there? But it was a long,
Yeah.
slow process, 30 years of them building this industry. And it really took off kind of at warp speed once learning went into the cloud. And we
Yeah.
got education software that was really pumping this mindset into all of the lessons. It's really kind of all
Hmm.
interwoven with the ed
Hmm.
tech and the teachers, the pedagogy, the methods, as well as the education departments at the college. So it's
Yeah.
quite systemic at this point,
Mhm.
SEL.
Mhm. It proves something that, again, Dr. Thomas Sowell said, talking about Mr. Goldman, that, at the bottom of almost every bad idea is a Harvard man. But so you didn't go to Harvard, so you're not offended. But this collectivism, it really is a code word for Marxist ideology that's coming into our education, and totalitarianism. Because if you look into history, at sort of the writings of people like Lenin, or of course what happened in Nazi Germany or Maoist China, you always see the subsuming of the individual into the collective. Not only in terms of rights and freedoms, which are basically destroyed. That is, you have to give up all of your rights and freedoms in order, for the collective good, which is naturally defined by the state, and is usually very, very bad for individuals. And part of what you talk about in your book here is that this centralized apparatus for values transmission threatens the autonomy of future generations because they give up their individuality. And so you say through SEL, this collectivist propaganda pervades modern classrooms, shaping students' worldviews, sort of click by click. And you say what started small has become a dangerous subversion of the educational system aimed at surveillance, indoctrination, and ultimately compliance with a globalist agenda. So that's a lot to unpack here, isn't
It
there?
is.
But it ties into but what some people call conspiracy theory. Things like demoralization. But the Soviet Union used to talk about back in the 1960s that the way that they would defeat the West is through ideology and through indoctrination of youth. And so we really shouldn't be surprised, actually, that this attack is coming through the education system, should we?
We shouldn't at all. And, they made it, I think, intentionally, very boring, very sleep-inducing, all of this stuff. I mean, just the
Yeah,
acronyms, as you say. And
yeah.
what they've done, really the key, I think, to what they've done is through SEL, they have reframed things like character traits and worldview and even political views. They've reframed all of these things as skills.
Yeah.
Right? So you hear everywhere about skills-based learning or
Mhm.
mastery-based learning or competency-based learning. All these terms, they sound so harmless. They sound actually good. As an engineer, I certainly want my kids to be competent and have skills and have mastery of all of their different academic subjects. But when you talk about mastery of something like an SEL skill,
Mhm.
empathy, or grit. One of my favorites, one of the learning frameworks talks about zest, measuring children's zest level. I mean, what does that even mean? I don't think
I thought
parents
Zest was a soap.
right? So it gets a little dystopian
Yeah.
quickly. It sounds like conspiracy theory, but if it's stepwise, you just look at the logic of it. You frame these things as skills, then you digitally assess them and you log them and you track them. Every student has a longitudinal database that essentially goes from pre-K all the way through college, which is now connected end to end with the workforce database. So it's cradle to grave almost, cradle through career,
Mhm.
I think some people call it,
Yeah.
with the tracking of these digital skills, little badges, little flags that through this adaptive learning software, these personalized learning platforms, you don't know what your kids are answering all day
Mhm.
long on all of these interfaces at school.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What one of the things that is shocking and concerning is that all of this might be okay if the data actually showed that students were learning useful skills, like actual skills. Of course, the left, as you point out, changes the meanings of these words, right?
Right, I think a lot of it
Diversity
would be
doesn't.
fine if it was just
Yeah,
math. If
Yeah.
it was algebra skills or grammar skills, I would be kind of okay with it. But once you
Yeah.
start tracking SEL skills, social skills, and emotional
Right.
capacities, that is dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. And it interferes with actual constructive learning and progression through a curriculum so that the test scores now in places like the United States and Canada and elsewhere are showing that this SEL is actually producing students who are largely shockingly ignorant. Of in fact, many of them are receiving high school diplomas. They're functionally illiterate. They don't have basic math skills, and they're not equipped to deal with what they're going to run into in the quote unquote real world because of the type of education that they're getting. And this seems to be all by design. But what they are is they are indoctrinated and they are preconditioned to vote in certain ways and to support certain policies that let's face it, aren't very good for them. Certainly aren't good for America or Canada. Based on the track record of Marxism. So this is a really serious problem, and we're really letting these kids down, aren't we?
We really are. I mean, it's the opportunity cost of not focusing, not really buckling down and getting a lot of the academics that they would get if they weren't so
Hmm.
focused on all of this social and emotional turmoil that they are analyzing all the time. Um, but also, the new versions of SEL, there was a kind of a redefinition of SEL in 2019, 2020, which is now feeding in through all of the various social emotional learning platforms and surveys and curricula that embed SEL. So the new version is explicitly activism oriented. It's
Right.
all about equity and social justice.
Hmm.
When you look at it, you can't even believe that they put this in print, but it's right there. It's
Yeah.
all over Castle's website and all of the various curriculum companies that produce this stuff that's being pumped
Hmm.
into our schools. It's very open.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
while we've been busy raising our kids, they've been busy turning them into activists, and openly so.
Yeah, and
Yep.
part of what their objective is actually to take ownership of our kids, or at least of their minds. And there's a few quotations here. There's some people might giggle at these, talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, or die, as I call it. Diversity is such a strength, it seems, that it requires constant propaganda to remind us of it, and a police state to enforce it. Some have said that diversity means fewer white people. Inclusion means exclusion of white people, and equity means stealing from white people. But in terms of kids, diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of means how to fix a flat tire by letting the air out of the other three. And that's really the problem, is we're not setting kids up for success. And this is what you talk about in your book. And that's why you're calling for change and reform, and some accountability within the educational system, right?
That's right. There's a group right now today in Utah. There's a bill being heard, and I am so excited about it because hopefully this could become a model for other states and countries. And what they're calling it, it's called the PACT Act. Um,
Mhm. More acronyms.
what's that?
They
Yeah,
never
more
stop, do they,
acronyms.
Priscilla?
But it's a prohibition of character tracking is the way that they've worded it. And I think that's really excellent because
Yeah.
the all of these assessments and platforms and surveys and dashboards and check-ins and all the different things they do, they are really tracking character traits. And
Yeah.
as I said, if it was just academics, that would be one thing, but it's not. So I think that might be the key to how we really root this stuff out of schools. It's not that we need to get rid of learning platforms altogether, although I think that would be great.
Mhm.
Um, that's gonna be a lot tougher sell than
Mhm.
just saying, "Okay, fine. If we're gonna use these things, I would like to see them disconnected from the cloud. I would like to see locally hosted software
Right.
so that it could be
Yeah.
inspected by
Sort of Back to
parents."
the Future.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Give me that floppy disk. If I would prefer textbooks, even actual textbooks that I could flip through and see what my kids are learning.
Hmm.
No parent in today's world has the time to go get the permissions to log in and go through every lesson of the curriculum, the cloud-based stuff. And even
Right.
if they
Yeah.
did, one update, one day later, the entire thing could be different. You don't know what your child
Hmm.
is seeing or
Yeah.
what the data trail that your child is leaving,
Hmm.
leaving behind. There's a huge wake behind your child as they go through all of these different platforms every
Hmm.
day.
Yeah. And one of the things you talk about in your book um, is that it's not just a matter of education. There's a downstream consequence of training kids to be activists, and that's manifesting itself publicly as violence. You posted something on your X page recently of saying feral behavior from children groomed for outrage by an activist school system. You say, we reap what we sow. And this is in relation to a story. An East Side mother was brutally assaulted recently in the morning by a mob of high school students during an anti-ICE classroom walkout. And she says it was totally unprovoked, and the cops just watched it all go down without intervening. And then there's another post that I found on your page describing Texas principal sent 200 students to Marxist anti-ICE indoctrination. And so it seems that some teachers or some principals are realizing what you're talking about, and they're taking active steps to prevent this. But this is not only bad for children's education; it's also very dangerous for them and for the rest of society, isn't it?
It is. We are creating Mao's Red Guard. But the SEL is completely systemic now. And this has been Castle's open goal. For 30 years,
Hmm.
they've been trying to weave it into everything children do. So I always say it's whack-a-mole. You get rid of
Yeah,
one curriculum or
yeah.
one extracurricular activity that's SEL
Hmm.
infused, and another one pops up in its wake.
That's
And
part of their strategy, isn't it? Actually, you
yeah, or
mentioned that in the
yeah,
book.
there's
Yeah.
SEL programs that after school clubs for drumming. There's SEL programs that Girls on the Run is one that my daughter had asked to
Mm.
join several years ago, and I looked into it and I said, I don't like this. This was before I knew anything about SEL, but I looked at it
Yeah.
and I said, I don't like it. It was a real strong feminist bent. And my daughter,
Yeah.
she's got a twin brother, and my little boy at the time, he said, I want to run too. I want to run. They were in elementary school. And I asked the school, can boys run, or is there a boys club? No, there was no boys
Yeah.
club, and boys were not allowed to join. So I said, no, that's not fair, you know.
Yeah. So much
And
for
come to find
diversity.
out, years later, it is an SEL. It is explicitly SEL focused. So
Uh,
it's in everything. It's in scouting. It's in boys and girls clubs. But
mhm.
most importantly, they got the teachers first. They brought
Yeah.
the teachers into SEL. They indoctrinated them through the colleges of education.
Mhm.
And so they
Mhm.
are true believers. They really
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a serious problem because teachers generally belong to unions, and unions tend to operate upon a Marxist ethos or ideology. And so the two sort of weave together. The collectivist Borg thinking of the union is connected to the way teachers are trained. And then when they get out and they're teaching, it's natural that they would think according to these patterns. Um, but what they don't realize is that these patterns are not only harming children, they're also very dangerous for teachers. And that's being played out right now, isn't it?
yes, we have seen also a lot of violence against teachers. That is,
Yeah.
as a person who comes from a family of teachers, that really breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as teachers are driven out of the profession, what happens? We become more and more dependent on these cloud-based platforms.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It almost seems like they have a plan at work, doesn't it, Priscilla?
Really
But
does. Drag
but
queen
there are
story hour. Hello. Yeah.
yeah, but there are some signs of hope. I mean, obviously, the work that people like you are doing. And I noticed that there was an announcement. Congress has introduced a landmark bipartisan bill to protect children online. The Kids Off Social Media Act is designed to safeguard and limit children's exposure to harmful online environments while empowering parents to better protect their children in the digital age. Do you think that could help if that bill is passed?
I have mixed feelings about that bill. I personally think that parents need to safeguard their children. Parents
Right.
need to not
Yeah.
put addictive devices with addictive
Hmm.
software um, into their children's hands. We
Yeah.
really need to get some tough love going on, and parents need to grow up and stop using the devices as babysitters and entertainment for their children. I don't like the idea of the government doing it this way because digital ID, how are you going to prove as an adult? How are you going to prove that you are of age to have your beloved social media account
Right.
other
Yeah.
than having to have a digital ID?
Hmm.
So I think it's a
Yeah.
backdoor. It's a yeah. So it's a way to get all of us conservatives on board, swept in.
Yeah. And sort of pass off the responsibility for raising and educating our children, instilling them with values, good values, values that we'd support, like faith, family, and freedom, for example,
Hmm.
and getting them to adopt the state's values. And once they do that, then the danger is that they can become activists. And you mentioned this in a post that you made on February 3rd. You said, "Why are kids protecting ICE, and what does social emotional learning have to do with it?" You say social media is exploding with footage of children's in political protests, and really, they don't belong there, do they? I mean, they're sort of. This reminds me of if you're familiar with Nietzsche's parable of the tarantula. The tarantula is the state or the left that promises equality and liberty and all these things, but it's using the sort of people, the vulnerable people, as apparatchiks, as ways
Right.
of and it feeds on them, whether it's, the LGBT crowd or Black Lives Matter. These are all expendable people. And it seems like this is happening to children now, that they're being weaponized for political ends. And this goes against, and as you talk about in your book, this goes against the whole idea of a classical liberal education, doesn't it?
It sure does. We see these little toy soldiers marching on the streets all over the country right now. It is highly disturbing. And the teachers egging them on or, at least allowing it. They shouldn't be there. And there are so many issues with safety. Are they supervised? There's a lot of angles from which you could approach this, but all of them are disturbing. They shouldn't be there. They need to be in the classroom learning
Mhm.
and learning to
Mhm.
think. Getting
Yeah.
out there and screaming. I think there's just a huge group dynamic. You can see it in a lot of their faces. These kids, they get out on the street, they start marching and screaming, and it's just it
Mhm.
just feeds on itself, right? It's an
Yeah.
energy, a very unhealthy, dark energy that's
Mhm.
feeding these protests.
Mhm. And it's hard to blame these kids because, um, and from K to 12, they're being instilled with things like critical race theory and queer theory, before they're learning their ABCs, they're learning this stuff.
Sure, the
And their brains are
SEL.
they're highly adaptable,
Yep.
to this, isn't it? I mean, the whole concept of neuroplasticity applies
Yes,
here. Their brains
yes.
develop in a way that is very unhealthy for them.
It's true,
Um,
and they
eh
focus so much on identity.
yeah,
SEL, that's one of the core concepts, identity, agency, and voice, and so it just breeds grievance. If you
yeah.
focused all day long on, I'm Black, I'm Latino, or my parents are divorced, or whatever it is, whatever your grievance is in life, you focus on it and dwell on it, and you act out rage in the end because you've been asked to
Mhm.
analyze and self-assess
Yeah,
this thing all day long. So
yeah. And what we're finding also is that, these kids that go through the educational system and are exposed to SEL, they're indoctrinated, is that they become very angry and violent adults. And so in recent times, we've had mass shootings in Colorado that involved a non-binary person. There was another one, mass shooter in Denver, identified as trans. There was the Aberdeen mass shooter identified as trans, and of course, there was a Nashville shooting where the former student went into a Christian school and shot some kids. And just this week in Canada, in British Columbia, we had a person who identified as trans and was indoctrinated with identity
Mhm.
politics, if we can call that, coming back into a school. And this is so bad, Priscilla, that when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada were announcing this, they were so cowardly that this was a man who was supposedly transitioning to a woman, which rational people understand is impossible. But the RCMP had to use. They felt they were compelled to honor the shooter, the killer, by using their pronouns. And
Right.
so, it's not, the problem really is not the kids, is it? The problem is in our institutions that have been indoctrinated and wokeified. They're the problem when we've got to get at and we've got to make the changes there. And this is what you talk about in your book. If we're going to make changes, we've got to revamp and renovate these institutions, don't we?
We really do. We've got to get the emotional tracking and all of this emphasis on the psychology in the schools. We've got to get it out and return to academics. You talk about these school shooters. I've done a few threads. If you look on my X
Hmm.
page, I've gone
Yes,
through
I've
each of
seen them.
these shooters and just looked at what SEL program. Not to directly blame it on the SEL program, but what SEL programs were in use at their school and in the district. How long has the district really been pushing this? And, some of them had 8, 10, 12 different SEL programs that taxpayers are funding at work in the schools. And even if you say, okay, well, it's not the program's fault. Well, the program isn't working. Let's just start with that. It's
Right.
not working.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
working for kids. They are less emotionally balanced than they ever have been. But it is working for the people who are trying to change our society at a
Yeah.
fundamental level. So
Yeah.
it's having the intended effect for the collectivists and the Marxists who are putting these things out into the world.
Yeah, and then that's really what we're up against, and
Yeah.
I think, one of the things you point out in your book that people need to think about is, these children, it's a trite to say this, but these children are our future. These are our future congressmen and congresswomen, future presidents and, doctors, lawyers, scientists, all of it, and these are the people gonna be running things before too long, and if they are not instilled with the values that are consistent with the ones that made, America great, which made countries like Canada free and prosperous, we're going to have a society that looks very, very different, aren't we?
Yeah, we already do. I mean, we've got several generations of kids now who don't seem to even agree that we should have a border. Or
Yeah.
that, or they don't recognize the difference between a legitimate immigrant with permission to be here, like my husband,
Yeah.
and somebody who came in illegally.
Yeah.
So,
To the
that's a
point
huge
where
problem.
we're actually arguing about whether or not somebody should have to show identification before they can vote.
Right, right.
Which would have been unthinkable a generation ago, right? Anyway, folks, we've had the pleasure here of spending some time with Priscilla West, who's she's an investigative journalist, mother, and author. She's written this book called "The New Face of Woke Education." We've been talking with her about it. She says that transparency is the enemy of the people who are behind this. And she exposes in her book SEL, or social emotional learning, as a toxic brew of psychology and sustainability promoted by an alliance of billionaires, politicians, and consultants at the expense of true education. And she says only by confronting it can we hold the education industrial complex accountable and reclaim our schools for authentic learning. So this book is available on Amazon, and also where else can people find your book?
Amazon is the main place, but it is available from I have a copy here so you can recognize it. It's a very short read. See? It's little, it's a quick read. I think it takes about 26 minutes to get through. But Encounter Books is the publisher, so you are welcome to order it directly from their page. I'm sure they'd appreciate that. But my purpose really in writing the book was to give parents a quick way to really understand what is this SEL and to begin to recognize it because it has pattern recognition, right? It has
Yeah.
50 different names. I like like I said, the Utah people are calling it character tracking. But
Yeah.
read the book and you'll begin to see it. You'll see it woven into the scouting programs now and just so many different things. And once you start to recognize it, you're saying, wait, where you're recording what about my child? And who
Hmm.
has access to this data and for how long? Wait a minute. So if parents will start to recognize it and start to speak up, we can turn this ship around. But
Yeah.
it starts with knowledge and recognition.
Yeah, well, I read the book. It took me longer than 26 minutes, but I'll tell you why. I had to stop a few times and think about things. But the things I really appreciate about your book, Priscilla, not only is very well written, but you back everything up with data. This isn't just some off the cuff opinion piece. This isn't Candace Owens rant. This is an essay. It's a documented essay about real things that are going on that are of concern, especially to parents like myself. I have a son who's a freshman at ASU. I have another one who's completing high school, and they talk to me about the stuff they're learning. And I see this stuff right up close. They ask me, they say, "Dad, I'm learning this in my class, and is this a real thing?" I'm going, "Well, let's talk about it." So, this is a great book, especially for parents, but also for anyone who's interested in what's going on, not only in our school system, but also more broadly speaking, across our institutions. Highly recommend this, and really enjoyed meeting you virtually, Priscilla. I hope that you're going to continue writing, and that this is the first of many more books. So I want to thank you so much for being our special guest. Before you go, I wonder if you could share with our viewers and listeners where they can find more of your writing, or where they can perhaps follow you on your various social media.
Oh, okay. I've written a few various things. I did a piece fairly recently on resiliency, which was published in the American Spectator. I think that's an important one because it covers a lot of aspects, but resiliency is another one of the ways that they sneak SEL into various programs. That one is quite far reaching because it also involves FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security and
Right. Mm-hmm.
emergency response and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
SEL is woven into all of those as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I will be working on another broadside with Encounter Books, and that one's going to be a little bit wider ranging and how SEL fits into the broader sort of social credit system that seems to be being constructed around us.
Yeah.
So yeah, there and sorry, I forgot what the other question you asked me was.
Oh,
Oh,
well,
my
people want to
social
follow
media.
you on social media. Where
Yeah.
would they
Priscilla
find
West
you? Certainly on X.
77. Priscilla
Okay.
West 77 on Twitter.
Great.
And you can also follow the new face of woke education on Facebook.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that you're writing another book,
Yay.
and I hope that you'll consider coming back to talk with us again when you publish that one.
I would love
It's
to.
been our Yeah, it's been joyful meeting you and talking with you about your book, and I wish you much continued success. Thanks so much for being our special guest here on Gray Matter, so that we can tell our viewers and listeners about the work that you're doing. It's a very important work.
Well, thank
Our
you
children
so
are our
much. Thank
future,
you.
and it's I think it's a blessing that people like you are writing books like this. It's very necessary. I mean, the way that I think this is kind of the message of your book overall is that, you say transparency is the enemy. We've got to expose this stuff, and your book and the work that GAI is doing is going a long way towards that. So it's been a real pleasure talking with you here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
thank you.
Hungry for truth beyond the television? Well, extend the conversation with Gray Matter online. Gray Matter's insights continue in your inbox. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter where we dive deeper into the spiritual battles facing Canadian families today. Equip yourself to stand firm in your faith and lead with godly wisdom. Join our growing community of truth seekers at substack.com/graymatter newsletter. Subscribe today and never miss the Canadian perspective on what matters most. In a world where truth is under siege, legal expert Leighton Grey's book, Lies, Laws, and Liberty, delivers the intellectual firepower you need. 17 powerful essays tackle our most pressing challenges, from free speech to family values. Don't just witness cultural upheaval, help shape what comes next. This isn't just another book, it's your roadmap to becoming a joyful warrior for truth, family, and freedom. Order on Amazon today and arm yourself with wisdom for the battles that matter most. The battle has always been over people and ideas, but they're just the targets. The real enemies are spiritual principalities and powers. Gray Matter's purpose is to reach out with the voice of Christian truth to men between 18 and 44. We believe that these sons and fathers are Christ's inheritance. Join us financially and help us to speak so Canadians hear truth that sets men free and brings families to Jesus. Contact us by email at graymatterconnect@gmail.com or mail us at Post Office Box 2436, Fort Macleod, Alberta, postal code T0L0Z0. Thank you for your support.